Rajmohan's Wife, a novel by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, published by K.N. Chatterjee, Upper Circular Road, Calcutta. Narrated by Ronita Ghosh Chakraborty. Preface by Brajendranath Banerjee. Strangely enough, Bengal's first great novelist, like Bengal's first great modern poet, made his debut in the field of literature in the English language. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was only 27 when he won a permanent place in the history of Bengali literature with his first novel in his mother tongue, Durgesh Nandini, published in 1865. 2 years before that, he had completed a novel in English. This was entitled Rajmohan's Wife and was published as a serial in 1864 in the weekly periodical The Indian Field, edited by Kishori Chand Mitra. The files of the Indian Field being now almost unobtainable, the existence of a complete English novel by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay was almost forgotten, and even his biographer and nephew, Mr. Shochish Chandra Chatterjee, has stated that Bankim did not finish this English novel. A happy chance has, however, enabled me to recover the complete story with the exception of the first 3 chapters. I had occasion, in connection with a different line of investigation, to go through the files of the famous Anglo-Bengali paper Hindu Patriot for 1864. Facilities for consulting, which were very kindly obtained for me by Sir Jadunath Sarkar from Mr. Shitanath Pal, a grandson of the great Bengali publicist Krishnadas Pal. With this volume of the Hindu Patriot was found bound by chance all but 3 of the issues of the Indian Field in which Bankim's novel had appeared. Thus, the historian of Bengali literature has reason to be grateful for a binder's mistake. This first serious work of Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay is now made accessible to a wider circle of readers than could possibly consult the files of the long defunct Indian Field. As regards the missing first 3 chapters of Bankim's original, it has been possible to substitute for them a version as close to Bankim's own as could be desired. At a later period of his life, Bankim himself had begun to prepare a Bengali version of his first novel, but he did not proceed further than the first 7 chapters of the English original. This fragment was completed in his own way by his nephew, Mr. Satish Chandra Chatterjee, who did not know that the fragment was actually a Bengali rendering of the English original, Rajmohan's wife. He, on the contrary, believed it to be an entirely new work and gave to the joint production the name of Vari Bahini. It is by means of a translation of the first 3 chapters of this Bengali book that the missing beginning of Bankim's English novel has been here supplied. Rajmohan's wife, as published by us now, thus comprises Bankim's own original English from chapters 4 to the conclusion, and our English rendering of Bankim's Bengali version from chapters 1 to 3. Rajmohan's Wife, Chapter 1. The Drawers of Water. There is a small village on the river Madhumati. On account of its being the residence of wealthy zamindars, it is regarded as a village of importance. One Chaitra afternoon, the summer heat was gradually abating with the weakening of the once keen rays of the sun. A gentle breeze was blowing. It began to dry the perspiring brow of the peasant in the field and play with the moist locks of village women just risen from their siesta. It was after such a siesta that a woman of about 30 was engaged in her toilet in a humble thatched cottage. She took very little time to finish the process, usually so elaborate with womankind: a dish of water, a tin-framed looking glass 3 inches wide, and a comb matching it sufficed for the task. Then a little vermilion adorned her forehead. Last of all, some betel leaves dyed her lips. Thus armed, a formidable champion of the world-conquering sex set out with a pitcher in her arm, and pushing open the wattled gate of a neighboring house, entered within it. There were 4 huts in the house which she entered. They had mud floors and bamboo walls. There was no sign of poverty anywhere. Everything was neat and tidy. The 4 huts stood on the 4 sides of a quadrangle. Of these, 3 had entrances opening on the yard. The 4th opened outwards. This last was the reception room, while the others, screened on all sides, constituted the zenana. Some brinjals and salads were growing on the carefully tilled plot of land in front of the raised terrace before the outer room. The whole was enclosed by a reed fence with a bamboo gate, so the woman could easily make her way into the house. It is superfluous to add that she went straight towards the zenana. I know not where the other inmates of the house had gone after their siesta, but at that time there were only two persons there. One, a young woman of 18, bent over her embroidery, and a child of 4, immersed in play. His elder brother had wilfully left his inkpot behind when going to school. The child's eyes had fallen on it, and he was joyfully smearing his face with the ink. He seemed to be afraid of his brother coming back, and snatched the inkpot away, and so he was emptying the pot. The newcomer sat down on the floor by the side of her who was working and asked, "What are you doing?" The other laughed and said, "Oh, it's Didi. What kindness! Whose face was it that I first saw on getting up this morning?" The guest laughed back and retorted, "Who else but the person you see every morning?" At this, the face of the younger woman clouded over for a moment, while the smile half lingered on the lips of the other. Let us describe them both at this place. It has already been mentioned that the visitor was 30 years of age. She was neither dark nor exactly olive. Her face was not quite pretty, yet there was no feature which displeased the eye. She had a sort of restless charm, and her smiling eyes heightened the effect of it. The ornaments on her person were not large in number, but constituted a fair load for a porter. The conch shell worker who had made her shell bracelet was no doubt a descendant of Vishwakarma himself. The woman adorned with these ornaments had only a coarse sari on her plump figure. There was evidently no love lost between the sari and the washerman, for it had not visited the laundry for a long time. The dainty limbs of the woman of 18 were not burdened with such abundance of ornaments, nor did her speech betray any trace of the East Bengal accent, which clearly showed that this perfect flower of beauty was no daughter of the banks of the Madhumati, but was born and brought up on the Bhagirathi. in some place near the capital. Some sorrow or deep anxiety had dimmed the lustre of her hair, of her fair complexion. Yet her bloom was as full of charm as that of the land lotus, half scorched and half radiant under the noonday sun. Her long locks were tied up in a careless knot on her shoulder, but some loose tresses had thrown away that bondage and were straying over her forehead and cheeks. Her faultlessly drawn arched eyebrows were quivering with bashfulness under a full and wide forehead. The eyes were often only half seen under their drooping lids, but when they were raised for a glance, lightning seemed to play in a summer cloud. Yet even those keen glances, charged with the fire of youth, betrayed anxiety. The small lips indicated the sorrow nursed in her heart. The beauty of her figure and limbs had been greatly spoiled by her physical or mental suffering. Yet no sculptor had ever created anything nearly as perfect as the form half revealed by the neat sari she wore. The well-shaped limbs were almost entirely bare of ornaments. There were only churis on the wrists and a small amulet on her arm. These, too, were elegant in shape. The younger woman put away her needlework and began to talk to the visitor. The latter displayed great eloquence in describing her domestic tribulations, most of which, unfortunately, were imaginary. She put the fringe of her mud-stained sari again and again to her eyes, which were not in a condition to call for it. But in certain eventualities, even the salagram god dies. As often as the end of the sari touched her eyes, they shed copious tears. After many such showers, she was preparing for a full dress outburst when her eyes suddenly fell on the ink-smeared face of the child who had emptied the ink-pot and was standing with a darkened countenance. The bizarre sight converted the tears of the narrator of household misery into laughter. Humor swept away pathos. When the ceremony of tears ended at last, the sun was really sinking down to rest. At this, the speaker invited the young woman to come with her to fetch water. She had, in fact, come there with a view to making that invitation. The younger woman refused, and when her companion began to press her, said, "There are crocodiles in the Madhumati. They will drag me away." Her companion laughed out loudly at this, which showed her that her objection was not admitted. Yet she added, "You should go now, Konuk. It is growing late." Konuk pointed to the sun, which was still above the trees, and said, "It is still noon." At this, the younger woman became grave and said, "You know, Konuk Didi, I never fetch water." "That is why I am asking you to," replied Konuk. "Why should you remain in a cage all day? Do not all other housewives draw water?" The younger woman said disdainfully, "That's a work for servant girls." "Why? Who fetches water for you? Where are your servants?" "Well, Thakurji fetches our water." "If the daughter can do servant's work, cannot the daughter-in-law?" The young woman said firmly, "I cannot argue about it, Konuk. You know my husband has forbidden me to fetch water, and you know him well." Konukmoi did not reply offhand. She quickly glanced around to see if anyone was coming. When she saw there was no one about, she stood with her eyes fixed on the face of her companion, as if wanting to say something. But she repressed the impulse from fear and remained musing with downcast eyes. The younger girl asked, "What are you thinking about?" "If only you had eyes," replied Konuk. The younger woman would not, however, listen to her. She made a sign to Konuk to stop and said, "Hush, hush, I understand your meaning." "If you have done so, what are you going to do now?" asked Konuk. The younger girl remained silent for a while. Her quivering lips and reddening brow betrayed the preoccupation of her mind. A slight tremor in her limbs also showed how agitated she was. After some time she said, "Let us go." "But is it wrong?" Konuk laughed and replied, "Wrong? I am not a fat-bellied Bhattacharya. I have nothing to do with the Shastras. But I would have gone even if I had 50 men." "Oh, what bravery!" replied the other, laughing, as she went out to get her pitcher. "50! Do you really wish for as many?" Konuk smiled sadly and said, "It is a sin even to say so, but if all the 50 were of the same sort as the one given me by fate, it would hardly matter. If I meet none, I am chaste and devoted wife, even if married to 1 crore of men." "The Kulin girl's lot!" exclaimed the other, and quickly got a tiny pitcher from the kitchen. The pitcher perfectly matched the carrier of water. Then they both marched off towards the river. Konuk laughed and said, "Come now, my proud girl. Let us go and show beauty's splendor to the gaping idiots. Hang you, monkey! Cried the other, and hid her blushing face in her veil. Chapter 2. The Two Cousins. The rays of the setting sun had vanished from the tops of the coconut palms, but night had not yet descended on the earth. It was at this time that Connaught and her companion were returning home, each with a pitcher in her arm. By the roadside was a small garden of a type rare in East Bengal. Numerous roses and mallika buds were caressing the eyes of the passerby from within the compound surrounded by a handsome iron fence. Walks covered with red brick dust had been laid down beside the old-style square and oval beds. There was a tank in the middle of the garden, whose banks were covered with soft turf. On one side was a row of brick-paved steps. Facing the steps was the reception room, in the front veranda of which two men were engaged in talk. The older of the two would be above 30. He was a tall and stout man. It was because he was too stout that he could not be said to possess a good figure. His complexion was dull and dark. There was no feature on his face which could give him the least claim to handsomeness. On the contrary, he had something positively unattractive about it. In fact, he was not a common face. At the same time, it was difficult to define its peculiarity offhand. He had a dhoti of Dhaka manufacture on. A long and twisted Dhaka chadar was tied around his head in the shape of a turban, which hid even the few wisps of hair that still remained there. His dark and corpulent body could be fully seen through the shirt of the Dhaka muslin he was wearing, and with it his gold amulet, which peeped out off and on. But the thick gold chain which adorned his neck had actually intruded outside his shirt. The shirt had gold studs fastened with a gold ring. All the fingers had rings, and there was a huge bludgeon of pitch in his hand. The two small feet were enclosed in English shoes. This man's companion was a remarkably handsome young man of about 22. His clear, placid complexion had turned a little dull, either through want of exercise or too much comfort. His clothes were good, but not very costly: a dhoti, a fine chadar, a cambric shirt, and English shoes. There was a single ring on one finger, and no amulet or necklace. The elder man addressed the other. "Well, Madhop, you have turned to Calcutta again. Why this infatuation?" "Infatuation," replied Madhop. "If my liking for Calcutta be an infatuation, why shouldn't yours for Radhaganj be called by the same name?" Mathur asked. "Why?" Madhub. "Why not? You have spent your life in the shade of the mango gardens of Radhaganj. You love Radhaganj. I have spent my life in the stench of Calcutta. I love Calcutta. Mathur. Stench only? The filth of the drains with rotten rats and cats thrown in? Surely a feast for the gods. Madhub smiled and said, "It is not for these that I go to Calcutta. I have business too." Mathur. Business indeed. New horses, new carriages, visiting all the sharks of the town, throwing away money, burning the oil, drinks for anglicized friends, and pleasures. What are you staring at that way? Have you never seen Konuk? Or has the girl with her just dropped from the sky? Ah, yes. Who is it with her? Madhub flushed, but immediately changed the subject and said, "What a girl Konuk is! She can laugh with so much sorrow eating into her heart." Mothur. Yes, but who is it she's got with her? Madhub. How can I say? I cannot see through clothes. You see she's veiled. It was in fact Konuk and her companion, who were returning with their pitchers. Everybody knew Konuk, but such indescribable beauty radiated from every movement of the other woman that it charmed the eyes first of Madhub and then of Mothur. Their looks remained fixed on her, and they were as fascinated by the sight as a deer is by the sound of the flute. When the words last recorded came out of the mouth of Madhub, a sudden gust of wind passed over the heads of the woman. The younger woman was then adjusting the pitcher in arms, still unused to carrying water, and she had brought down her hand from the whale. The wind blew it away and revealed the face. Madhub raised his brows in surprise. Mothur said, "There, you know her." "Yes, you know her and I do not. I have spent my life here, and you are only a newcomer. Well, if you know her, who is she?" "My sister-in-law." "Your sister-in-law? Rajmohan's wife?" "Yes, Rajmohan's wife, and I have not seen her? How can you? She never leaves her house." "Why then has she today?" "I don't know." "What sort of a woman is she?" "You have seen her. Very handsome." "Oh, a thought reader indeed." "I am not asking that. Is she a good woman?" "What do you mean by a good woman?" Mothur. "Oh, the college has done for you. It is impossible to talk with people who have once gone there and recited the jargon of the red-faced sahibs. What I mean is, has she—" The stern frown of Madhub cut short the coarse speech forming on Mothur's lips. Madhub said haughtily, "You need not be so outspoken. You have no business to prattle about a respectable woman passing along the road." Mothur replied, "Did I not say that A smattering of English converts our brethren into fairy sahibs? Well, if one is not to discuss one's sister-in-law, whom is one to discuss? His grandmother? Anyway, let it pass. Relax your scowling face, or the crows would begin to peck at it. What luck! That clown Rajmohan to have a wife like this? Marriage is called a lottery, said Madhub. And after a few more words, the two parted company. Chapter 3. The Truants Return Home. Konuk and her companion silently pursued their way home. The latter was feeling extremely shy before men, and at her silence, Konuk also had to remain silent. Konuk, however, felt the missed opportunity of wagging her tongue very keenly. The pathway was more lonely near their homes, and the younger woman began. How the wretched wind hustled me! Why, replied Konuk laughingly, has your brother-in-law never seen you before? I am not thinking of him, but there was another man with him. He is Mothur Babu. Have you never seen him? No, indeed. Is he Mothur Babu, the cousin of my sister's husband? Yes. Who else? What a shame. Please don't talk about it to anybody. Oh no, I am going to tell people that you dropped your veil and showed your face when coming back from the river, said Konuk, and began to simper. The younger woman said angrily, Go to Jericho. How she goes on! I would never have come with you if I had known. Konuk laughed again. Leave your jokes alone. Oh, horror! Durga, save me! Cried out the young woman as she cast her eyes towards her house and began to tremble. They were at that time quite close to it. Konuk saw Rajmohan standing at the door with glaring eyes, the very image of death, and whispered to her companion, There is trouble for you. Let me go in with you. I might be of some help. Rajmohan's wife replied in the same low tone, Oh no, I am quite used to it. It would probably be worse if you are there. You had better go home. At this Konuk went her way. Rajmohan did not speak to his wife when she entered the house. She went to the kitchen to put her pitcher down. He followed her silently there. When she had set it down, he said to her, Wait a moment, and poured out all the water on the dust heap. Rajmohan had an old aunt who used to do his cooking. She scolded Rajmohan for thus wasting the water. Why are you throwing the water away? You don't keep a score of servants to draw water. Shut up, you old hag, cried out Rajmohan, and flung away the empty pitcher. Then he turned round to his wife and said in a softer but scathing tone, "Well, Queen, where have you been?" The woman firmly whispered back, "I had gone to fetch water." She was standing like a statue, exactly on the spot where her husband had asked her to stop. "To fetch water?" taunted Rajmohan. "But with whose permission did you go out?" "With nobody's permission." Rajmohan could restrain himself no longer. "With nobody's permission? Have I not forbidden you 1,000 times?" The woman replied in the same even tone, "You have." "Then, wretched girl, why did you go?" The woman proudly replied, "I am your wife." Her face reddened and her voice began to be choked. "I had gone because I thought there was nothing wrong in it." At this display of boldness, Rajmohan absolutely blazed up. "Have I not forbidden you 1,000 times?" he shouted, and jumping on his wife, who was standing stock still, gripped her by the wrist, raising his other hand to strike her. The helpless woman seemed to understand nothing. She did not move away one step from her assailant, but only looked at him with such pathetic eyes that his hand remained motionless as if spellbound. After a moment's silence, Rajmohan dropped his wife's hand, but immediately shouted out, "I'll kick you to death." Even then, the chidden woman did not reply. Only tears were streaming down her face. At the sight of her silent suffering, the cruel man softened a little. He no longer tried to beat her, but continued his abuse. It is unnecessary to try the patience of my readers by reproducing all of his billingsgate. The patient woman bore it silently. When at last Rajmohan's anger ebbed away, his aunt gathered some courage. She took her nephew's wife by the hand and led her into a room, all the while scolding her nephew. Even that was done circumspectly. But when she saw at last that Rajmohan had almost cooled down, she burst out in her turn and paid the nephew back in his own coin. Rajmohan was then nursing his own grievances. He could not quite appreciate the language of his aunt. At any rate, there was no novelty in it, for he had heard it many times before. So they both parted. The aunt began to console the wife, and Rajmohan went out pondering whom to fall upon and smash